The summer that I was 10. Can it be that there was only one summer when I was 10? Must have been a long one then. Each day I go out and choose a fresh horse from my stable, which was a willow grove down by the old canal. I'll go on my 2 bare feet, but when, with my brother's jackknife, I'd cut me a long, limber horse with a good thick knob forehead and peeled him slick and clean, except a few leaves for the tail, and cinched my brother's belt around his head for a rein, I'd straddle and canter him fast up the grass bank to the path, trot along in the lovely dust that talcumed over the hooves, hide on my toes and turn at his feet to swift half-moons. The willow knob with the strap jouncing between my thighs was a pommel yet a pole to my nickering pony's head. My head and my neck were mine, yet they were shaped like a horse. My hair flopped to the side like the mane of a horse in the wind. My forelock swung in my eyes, my neck arched, and I snorted. I skeeled and skittered and reared and stopped and raised my knees, pawed at the ground and quivered. My teeth bared as we wheeled and swished through the dust again. I was the horse and the rider, and the leather I slapped to his rump, spanked my own behind, doubled my 2 hooves, beat a gallop along the bank. The wind twanged in my mane, my mouth squared to the bit, and yet I sat on my steed, quiet, negligent riding, my toes standing in the stirrups, my thighs hugging his ribs. And a walk we drew to the porch, I tethered him to a paling. Dismounted, I smoothed my skirt and entered the dusty hall. My feet on the clean linoleum left ghosty toes in the hall. "Where have you been?" said my mother. "Been riding," I said from the sink and filled my glass of water. "What's that thing in your pocket?" she said. Just my knife." I waved my pocket and stretched my dress away. "Go tie back your hair," said my mother. "And why's your mouth all green? Rob Roy, he pulled some clover as we crossed the field," I told her.
So to analyze this poem, I'm going to use the Vendor analysis method. So starting with the meaning, this poem represents a child's imagination that is more simple and calming and brings nostalgia to the reader. The meaning reflects creativity and the specific memories that remain in the upbringing of these memories. This can be seen in the first sentence of the poem, "That summer when I was 10, can there be only one summer when I was 10, meaning that it was an older memory, and also just the meaning of it being very specific, saying where my head and neck were mine, yet they were shaped like a horse, meaning like a nostalgic creative memory that the reader came up with themselves. The second part, the antecedent scenario, is this speaker is definitely reminiscing on their childhood and an experience where they might be experiencing currently something where they need to go back and look at a more comforting memory in order to recover from something. And this can be seen also towards the beginning, where each day I choose a fresh horse from my stable from the beginning of the poem, and it's just a comforting memory that they definitely are very fond of due to the language used in the poem. This poem, I think, is divided into 3 different sections. The first section is where the reader is explaining their upbringing and like how they found this horse and them going to the stable. The middle part, which I would say is the climax, is when the horse is, like they're riding the horse, is getting a little violent. And the third part would be when the main character goes back to reality, or into their parents' house, and have to leave this imaginative world they came up with. So the climax would start along with "trot along in the lovely dust that talcumed over his hooves." And this second part would be the climax because it did seem the most violent, but these actions also seemed very playful and enjoyable for the main character. The first and third parts were more there to support the climax and lead up to that moment. And the climax seems to only be the only section that is explaining the imagination portion. The first and third seem to be more of a reality and why they would need to go into this imaginative state to find more comfort and more of like a fantasy world. The skeleton chart would start a little bit lower for the first section, and in the second section it would go up to almost the top, and I think in the third it would go down slightly, but not all the way. And that's the escalation of the intensity within this poem. But it ends on an ominous and mysterious note due to the presence of the knife, which is not elaborated throughout the poem. But it is just a memory of a child playing in a very simple way. And so the poem isn't that intense, although it does seem violent. The meaning is very simple. Next is the language in this poem, and the diction is meant to be simple and more childlike, so it can be read and taken more literally. An example of this would be peeled him slick and clean, and entered the dusky hall. It's just more simple language, easier for children to understand because this seems to be written from the perspective of a child. And that also makes the poem more relatable, especially since the poem is in past tense for nostalgic purposes and to remind the main character that it is their own memories, and they can be violent and they can sometimes be unrealistic, but that does bring in comfort. The tone of this poem emphasizes the importance of being free and living in an unstoppable and independent environment. The main character seems like they're very much enjoying themselves, and this is very much the ideal situation and mindset that they would like to be in. And because they're able to be this free and express themselves in this way, they seem to be having a better time than they would be if this wasn't an option for them. It also has more of a liberal view, and the tone seems to be very whimsical and easygoing due to the creativity of this child about what the poem is. And the agent is where the main character seems to use plenty of sound effects to show their oddities and their age. This changes by leaving reality to go to the stable and then coming back when she meets up with her mom at the end of the poem. And the sounds of this could be in the second section, my forelock swung in my eyes, my neck arched and I snorted, I shield and skittered and reared and stopped and raised my knees. This entire section, it's very specific, and it shows the oddities that someone at the age of 10 would have, and they would have that creative mindset to come up with this entire scenario. The roads not taken would be reorganizing the poem to where it was not in chronological order, and maybe separating it to where all the parts in the imaginative world were clumped together and all of the parts in reality were clumped together, and maybe just explaining how the imagination part had more of an upbringing by putting the first and third section together. And it would also just I think it would have a bigger impact of the reality section, because it would just make it a little more obvious that it wasn't an actual event that did occur, and it was more of a memory that was just going in another world in order to find comfort and pleasure. And the genres of this would be more of a liberal or feminist lens due to the established freedom. And this is also a free verse poem and a section into lines of 3, and there are 20 stanzas. It is more liberal because of the independent and easygoing tone that was already established due to the different perspectives, and especially because is the perspective of a younger person. The imagination of this is striking for releasing violent memories for comfort purposes, and this is very well written, but it still ends up being very simple due to the language. And so yeah, it didn't really have much of a new perspective because it is very simple, but I think it not bringing anything new to the table is actually more monumental because it emphasizes the fact that this is a regular experience or thought process that children go through, and it can be very much more relatable that way. And that is the end of my Venn analysis. Thank you so much.